The crisp, final click of a boarding gate latch can sound like a gavel declaring judgment. For most, it means a journey is about to begin. But for Dr. Lucy Gabrielle, a woman who had conquered the male-dominated worlds of aeronautical engineering and corporate finance, it was the sound of a door being slammed shut in her face. The uniformed man in front of her, a gate agent for an airline she was about to command, saw nothing but the color of her skin and her comfortable travel attire. He didn't see the doctorate, the razor-sharp intellect, or the title she was days away from officially claiming CEO. This isn't just a story about a misunderstanding. It's about what happens when deep-seated prejudice collides with unseen power and the shocking, life-altering karma that follows. Stay with me as we unpack the story of the gate agent who told a black woman she couldn't board, only to find out he had just denied boarding to his new boss. The air in Terminal 4 of Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, was a familiar, chaotic symphony. It was a blend of rolling suitcase wheels, clattering against polished terrazzo floors. The distant, garbled announcements of flight changes and the low hum of 1,000 conversations intertwining into a single, restless murmur. Dr. Lucy Gabrielle stood slightly apart from the throng, observing the organized chaos at Gate 42B, with the keen eye of a systems analyst. She was flying to New York's JFK, a routine cross-country hop she'd made countless times. Today, however, was different. This was not a business trip for the consulting firm she had just left. This was a reconnaissance mission. In 72 hours, an official press release would announce her as the new Chief Executive Officer of Global Voyager Airlines, the very airline whose branding was plastered in bold blue and silver across the gate. She was flying as a private citizen under her own name to experience her new company from the ground up before the storm of her arrival. Lucy believed you couldn't fix a system until you understood its pressure points. She had spent the last 2 hours analyzing everything. The confusing signage, the lack of adequate charging stations, the strained expressions on the faces of the customer service staff. She saw a company gasping for air, weighed down by inefficiency and a palpable lack of morale. Dressed in a tailored but comfortable navy blue cashmere travel suit and elegant yet practical Rothy's flats, she looked more like a successful author or a university professor than a corporate titan. She carried no flashy designer handbag, opting instead for a discreet leather tote that held her laptop, a well-worn copy of a technical manual on next-generation engine efficiency, and her travel documents. She blended in, and that was precisely the point. The boarding process for Flight 812 to JFK began with the usual tiered calls. First-class military personnel families with small children. Lucy held a first-class ticket, a necessary indulgence for the work she intended to do on the flight, but she waited, preferring to observe the flow. As the call for Group 1 echoed, she approached the podium. There were 2 gate agents. A young woman, Chloe, with bright eyes and a nervous energy, was scanning boarding passes with a practiced rhythm. The other was a man in his late 40s, his name tag reading Kyle Peterson. He carried himself with an air of weary authority, his uniform jacket slightly too tight across his shoulders. He had a look Lucy had seen 1,000 times, in 1,000 different settings, the look of a man who felt the world owed him something more than his current position. He was the one who motioned her forward. "Boarding pass and ID, please," he said, his voice flat. His eyes already scanning the line behind her. Lucy handed them over. He took her passport and ticket, his thumb rubbing over her name, Dr. Lucy Gabrielle. A flicker of something annoyance, disbelief crossed his face as he looked from the doctor on the ticket to the black woman standing before him. "Step to the side, please," he said, not as a request, but as a command. He gestured vaguely to a small cordoned-off area next to the podium. Lucy, accustomed to the endless vagaries of air travel, complied without immediate protest. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Kyle didn't answer. He finished scanning the passes of a white family of 4, offering them a thin smile. "Enjoy your flight." Then he turned his attention back to Lucy's documents, holding them up to the light as if they were a suspected forgery. Chloe, the younger agent, cast a worried glance from Kyle to Lucy and back again. "This ticket is showing a flag in our system," Kyle announced, his voice now loud enough for those nearby to hear. Heads began to turn. Humiliation, Lucy knew, was a public spectacle. "A flag, I purchased it directly from the Global Voyager website 2 days ago. I'm a Platinum Medallion member," she stated, keeping her tone professional. She knew her status should preclude almost any ticketing issue. Kyle tapped aggressively at his screen. "Our system is very sophisticated, ma'am. It flags irregularities. It could be a payment issue, a security concern." He let the words hang in the air, the implication clear. "I can assure you my payment was processed correctly. Perhaps you could tell me the specific nature of the flag?" Lucy pressed, refusing to be dismissed. She could feel the prickling heat of dozens of eyes on her. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics," he said, puffing out his chest slightly. "For security reasons. We're going to have to ask you to wait while we verify your identity and the validity of this ticket." "Verify my identity?" "You're holding my United States passport," she said, a sliver of ice entering her tone. Behind her, the line was growing restless. A man in a rumpled suit huffed impatiently. Kyle seemed to draw strength from the audience. He was no longer just a gate agent. He was the guardian of the gate, the protector of protocol. "Everyone has a passport these days," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Protocol is protocol." Chloe leaned over and whispered something to him, pointing at her own screen. Kyle swatted her concern away with a sharp, barely perceptible shake of his head. He was enjoying this. The power to make this poised, articulate black woman wait to cast doubt upon her legitimacy was a balm to some deep-seated resentment within him. 10 minutes crawled by. The boarding of Group 1 and 2 was complete. The line had thinned. Lucy stood her ground, her initial analytical calm beginning to fray at the edges, replaced by a cold, familiar anger. It was the same anger she'd felt when a professor had once suggested engineering might be too challenging for her, or when a banker had directed questions about her business loan to her male subordinate. It was the exhaustion of having to constantly prove she belonged in spaces she had more than earned the right to occupy. "Kyle, the flight is nearly boarded," Chloe said, her voice now a nervous, high-pitched whisper. "The system shows her status is cleared. It was just a sync delay." Kyle ignored her. He picked up the phone at the podium, dialed an extension, and spoke in a low, conspiratorial tone. "Yeah, security check at gate 42B. Gabrielle Lucy. Hayes. Yeah, first class. Looks suspicious. Can you run it again?" Lucy's jaw tightened. Suspicious. The word was a weapon, vague and venomous. What was suspicious? Her cashmere suit, the doctorate on her ticket. Her skin. Finally. After another 5 minutes, the final boarding call was announced. Lucy stepped forward again. "The flight is about to close. My ticket is valid, and you have my identification. I insist on boarding my flight." Kyle placed her passport and ticket down on the counter just out of her reach and held up a hand, palm out, a gesture of absolute finality. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with insincere regret. "We haven't received the all-clear from our internal security check. I can't allow you to board. It's for the safety of all our passengers." The lie was so bald, so audacious, that it momentarily took Lucy's breath away. He was inventing a phantom security protocol to exercise his prejudice. The quiet gasp from Chloe confirmed it. "You can't be serious," Lucy said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "You are denying me boarding on a flight for which I have a valid first-class ticket based on a non-existent security flag that your colleague has already told you is clear." "My decision is final," Kyle said, crossing his arms. He nodded to the ground crew visible on the jet bridge. "Close it up." The heavy door to the jet bridge began to swing shut with a hydraulic hiss. The click of the latch echoed in the suddenly silent gate area. Flight 812 was leaving, and Dr. Lucy Gabrielle was not on it. Kyle Peterson finally slid her passport and boarding pass back across the counter, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "You can take it up with customer service," he said, turning his back to her to begin processing the flight's final paperwork. "They're over in Terminal 5. Lucy stood there for a long moment, the world narrowing to the man who had just publicly humiliated her. He thought he had won. He thought he had put her in her place. He had no idea that he hadn't just closed a door on a passenger. He had sealed his own fate. With a slow, deliberate calmness that belied the fury churning within her, Lucy Gabrielle pulled out her phone. She didn't look for the customer service number. She scrolled to a name at the top of her favorites list, Marcus Thorne, chairman of the board Global Voyager Airlines. The first call Lucy made wasn't filled with rage. It was precise, strategic, and chillingly calm. "Marcus, it's Lucy," she said, her voice steady, as she walked away from the gate to a quieter corner overlooking the tarmac. She watched as the ground crew unhooked the jet bridge from Flight 812. Her flight. "Lucy, are you in the air? I was just looking at the preliminary numbers for next quarter. It's a mess. But I have faith." Marcus Thorne's voice boomed through the phone. He was a man who spoke in exclamation points, a whirlwind of old money energy, who had staked his reputation on her hiring. "Not quite, Marcus. I'm still at LAX. I've just been denied boarding on one of our aircraft." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end of the line. What denied boarding? Was there an overbooking situation? We can have them on the coals for that first-class ticket. It's outrageous. It wasn't an overbooking. Lucy stated, her eyes locking onto Kyle Peterson, who was now laughing with another uniformed colleague, likely recounting his little victory. The gate agent, a Mr. Kyle Peterson, cited a security flag on my ticket. He held my documents for over 20 minutes, publicly questioned their validity, and ultimately refused me entry onto the plane, even after his partner informed him the system was clear. A security flag. On you. Marcus sounded incredulous. That's impossible. You have a higher security clearance from your time on the Federal Transportation Advisory Board than I do. What on earth did this man say? He said I looked suspicious and that his decision was for the safety of all passengers. Lucy let the words land. She didn't need to embellish them. The unvarnished truth was damning enough. The silence on the line was now heavy, glacial. Marcus Thorne was not a stupid man. He had steered corporations through hostile takeovers and PR nightmares. He understood the optics and the poison of what Lucy was describing with perfect clarity. Lucy, tell me exactly what happened. Don't leave out a single detail. She did. in the same dispassionate, analytical tone she would use to dissect a faulty engine schematic. She recounted the entire incident, the immediate dismissal, the performative document, check the loud pronouncements of a flag. Kyle's rejection of his colleague's clarification and the final smug refusal. She described the feeling of being put on display, the public nature of the humiliation. When she finished, Marcus spoke, his voice no longer booming, but a low, dangerous growl. "Where are you right now?" "Still near Gate 42B. Mr. Peterson is finishing his paperwork. Stay right there. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone else. I am making 2 calls. The first is to Robert Liu, our Chief Operating Officer. The second is to the head of West Coast Operations. Someone will be with you in less than 5 minutes. Do you have the agent's full name, Kyle Peterson?" she repeated. Kyle Peterson. Marcus echoed the name, sounding like a curse. "Lucy, I have no words. This is the very sickness we hired you to cure. I'm just sorry you were forced to endure a symptom of it on day 0. "Don't be sorry," Marcus, Lucy said, a steely resolve hardening her voice. "Be ready to work. This isn't a problem anymore. It's a case study." She hung up and walked back towards the gate, her tote bag held loosely in her hand. She stood a polite distance away, simply watching. Kyle, having finished his tasks, was stretching a man satisfied with his day's work. He glanced over, saw her standing there, and rolled his eyes, a clear expression of, "Can't you take a hint?" He then said something to Chloe, who looked at Lucy with an expression of profound apology and fear, before scurrying away towards the employee break areas. Kyle, however, remained. He seemed determined to outweight her, to ensure she didn't cause any more trouble. He was tidying the counter, aligning keyboards and stacking stray paper, a petty tyrant, surveying his immaculate little kingdom. Less than 4 minutes later, a man in a tailored suit, his face pale and beaded with sweat, came speed-walking towards the gate. He was followed by a woman in a Global Voyager corporate uniform, whose frantic pace suggested she had run the entire length of the terminal. The man was Daniel Choi, the LAX station manager. "Dr. Gabrielle?" he asked, his voice breathless. He was looking around frantically, his eyes scanning the faces of the few remaining passengers. His gaze passed right over Lucy. She stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Gabrielle." Daniel Choi froze. He looked at her, then at the printout in his hand, then back at her. The color drained from his already pale face. He had clearly been expecting someone else. My apologies, Dr. Gabrielle. I'm Daniel Choi, the station manager. I was told there was an incident." His eyes darted nervously towards Kyle, who was watching this exchange with a dawning sense of confusion. "There was Mr. Choi," Lucy said calmly. "Your gate agent, Mr. Peterson, has just prevented me from taking my flight to New York." Daniel's head whipped around to face Kyle. The confusion on Kyle's face was now curdling into apprehension. He saw the sheer terror in his manager's eyes and knew something was terribly wrong. "Kyle, what is this?" Daniel snapped, his voice a harsh whisper. "What did you do?" "I just did my job, Dan," Kyle said defensively, puffing up his chest again, a reflexive act of bravado. "This passenger had a security flag on her ticket. I followed protocol. It wasn't cleared in time, so I denied boarding. Safety first." Daniel looked as if he was about to be physically ill. He took a step closer to Kyle, lowering his voice so only they and Lucy could hear. "You fool," he hissed, his words dripping with panic. "You absolute career-ending fool. Whose security flag hers?" "Yeah, hers," Kyle said, though his confidence was rapidly evaporating. "Who is she anyway?" Daniel Choi took a deep, shuddering breath. He straightened his tie, turned to face Lucy with an expression of utter mortification, and made the announcement that brought Kyle Peterson's world crashing down around him. "Mr. Peterson," Daniel said, his voice trembling but clear, "allow me to introduce you to Dr. Lucy Gabrielle. She holds a PhD in aeronautical engineering from MIT and an MBA from Stanford. And as of 9 a.m. Monday morning, she is the new Chief Executive Officer of Global Voyager Airlines." The silence that followed was absolute. The background noise of the terminal seemed to fade away. Kyle Peterson's face went through a rapid, brutal series of transformations. First blank confusion, then a slow, dawning comprehension, as if trying to solve a complex math problem in his head. This was followed by a wave of disbelief, his eyes pleading with his manager to say it was a joke. And finally, as he looked at the calm, unyielding expression on Lucy's face, the blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly grey pallor. The smugness, the authority, the self-satisfaction, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the raw, naked terror of a man who had just realized he'd pointed a loaded gun at his own head and gleefully pulled the trigger. He looked at Lucy, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not what his prejudice had wanted him to see, but the woman who now held his entire professional life in the palm of her hand. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. A faint tremor started in his hands. "Mr. Peterson," Lucy said, her voice cutting through the silence, devoid of any emotion except a chilling finality. "You and I will be having a conversation. But first, Mr. Choi, I'd like you to arrange a car, and then I want you to secure every piece of data related to this incident. The CCTV footage from this gate, the logs from both agents' terminals, the audio recordings from your internal security line. Everything. Consider it the first official directive of your new CEO." 2 days later, the official press release hit the news wires, sending a jolt through the aviation industry. Global Voyager Airlines appoints Dr. Lucy Gabrielle as new CEO in major shakeup. The story was accompanied by a professional headshot of Lucy, poised, intelligent, exuding a quiet confidence that seemed a world away from the woman who had been publicly shamed at Gate 42B. The article detailed her stellar credentials, her groundbreaking work on fuel efficiency algorithms at Boeing, her role in turning around 2 struggling tech firms, her seat on the President's Transportation Advisory Board. She was hailed as a brilliant, transformative leader, a visionary hired to pull the legacy airline out of its financial nosedive. Inside the 50th floor boardroom of Global Voyager's Chicago headquarters, the atmosphere was thick with a mixture of feigned enthusiasm and palpable tension. Lucy sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, a position that until last week had been occupied by Arthur Vance, a 68-year-old industry veteran who had been gracefully but firmly pushed into retirement. Vance was present, seated to Lucy's right, his face a mask of polite indifference that barely concealed his simmering resentment. Lucy had spent the last 48 hours in a whirlwind of meetings, data analysis, and briefings. She now had a clearer picture of the rot within the company, and the incident at LAX was no longer an isolated event in her mind. It was a perfect festering symptom of the disease. "Good morning, everyone," Lucy began, her voice resonating with an authority that commanded the room's attention. I want to thank Arthur for his years of service and for guiding the company to this point. A polite, perfunctory round of applause followed. Arthur gave a stiff nod. But we can't afford to look backward. Lucy continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the C-suite executives. Our on-time performance is the second worst among major U.S. carriers. Our customer satisfaction ratings have fallen for 8 consecutive quarters. Our operating margins are razor thin, and our employee morale is, to put it mildly, in the gutter. We are a legacy airline clinging to a legacy mindset in a world that has moved on. She clicked a button, and the large screen behind her lit up with a series of brutal, unflattering charts and customer comments. Words like outdated, rude, unhelpful, and indifferent were displayed in a large word cloud. Arthur Vance cleared his throat. Now, Lucy, it's not all doom and gloom. We have a very loyal customer base, and these metrics can be cyclical, respectfully. Arthur. Our loyal customer base is aging out, and our brand is failing to connect with a new generation of travelers. Lucy countered, her tone sharp but not disrespectful. And what some might call cyclical downturns, I call systemic failures. The problem isn't our planes or our routes, it's our culture. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. Our culture has become one of complacency, of passing the buck, and in some corners of outright hostility towards the very people who pay our salaries, our customers. An uncomfortable silence descended upon the room. These executives were used to corporate jargon and sanitized reports, not this kind of blunt, surgical honesty. 2 days ago, Lucy continued, her voice, now colder, more personal. I had a direct experience with this cultural sickness. I was flying from LAX to JFK on Flight 8 and 12, and I was denied boarding by one of our own gate agents. You could have heard a pin drop. The executives exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't on any agenda. This was real. He cited a phantom security risk. He insinuated that my ticket and my passport were fraudulent. He did this publicly, loudly, and with a sense of righteous authority. He did it despite his colleague informing him he was mistaken. He did it because he looked at me and made a judgment that had nothing to do with airline security and everything to do with his own personal biases. She looked directly at Samuel Gallagher, the head of human resources, a man whose primary skill seemed to be avoiding conflict. Samuel, how many official complaints have been filed against a gate agent named Kyle Peterson at our LAX hub in the last 5 years? Gallagher blanched. He fumbled with his tablet, his hands suddenly clumsy. Dr. Gabrielle, I wouldn't have that information right here. I'd have to have my team pull the file. I've already had it pulled. Lucy said, her voice like ice. The number is 12. 12 official complaints detailing rude, dismissive, and discriminatory behavior. 6 of them from women of color. And what was the outcome of these 12 complaints? Gallagher swallowed hard. I believe they were handled at the local level. A few verbal warnings, required retraining modules. In other words, nothing, Lucy stated flatly. 12 times a problem was reported. 12 times the system shuffled some papers, issued a slap on the wrist, and allowed the problem to fester. The manager who signed off on dismissing the last 4 complaints was a Mr. Daniel Miller. Is that correct? Yes, that's the LAX hub, supervisor, Gallagher stammered. And Mr. Miller and Mr. Peterson are, I'm told, frequent fishing buddies. This isn't a case of one bad apple. This is a case of the orchard being sick. The soil is toxic. We have a system that protects the aggressor and dismisses the victim. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. The story of what happened to me at that gate is going to become a legend within this company. Everyone will know it, and they will all be watching to see what happens next. If Kyle Peterson receives another retraining module and a verbal warning, then the message we send to every single one of our 80,000 employees is that our new CEO is just more of the same, that our policies are meaningless, and that at Global Voyager Airlines, prejudice is a fireable offense only if you commit it against the person who signs your checks. She turned back to face the stunned boardroom. This is our defining moment. This isn't about revenge. I am not interested in destroying one man's life. I am interested in saving this company's soul. The investigation into Mr. Peterson will be thorough, it will be impartial, and it will be handled by a third-party firm, effective immediately. Samuel, your department will cooperate fully, but will not lead it. Furthermore, the investigation will expand to include the handling of all past complaints at the LAX hub and the performance of its management, including Mr. Miller. Her eyes met Arthur Vance's. She saw in them a flicker of grudging respect mixed with the bitterness of being usurped. Our new policy starting today is zero tolerance. Not as a slogan on a poster in the break room, but as a core operational principle. We will rebuild our culture from the ground up. We will retrain every customer-facing employee. We will create new transparent channels for complaints that bypass the buddy system. And we will exit any employee from a baggage handler to a senior vice president who proves incapable of treating every single passenger and colleague with baseline human dignity and respect. She returned to her seat at the head of the table. The air was electric. She had thrown down a gauntlet. This wasn't just about fixing the balance sheet. It was a corporate exorcism. Now she said, her tone shifting back to business, though the intensity remained. Let's talk about our fleet modernization strategy. The message was clear. The old way of doing business at Global Voyager Airlines was officially over. The revolution had begun, not with a press conference, but in the sterile quiet of a boardroom sparked by a single ugly incident at Gate 42B. Kyle Peterson was not a man to go quietly. Suspended with pay pending the results of an investigation, he spent the first 48 hours in a state of shock and self-pity. He saw himself as the victim. He'd been doing his job, a job he'd held for 17 years, and now his world was collapsing because he'd had the bad luck to enforce the rules on the wrong person. In his mind, it was a setup, a trap. The new CEO, this black woman with a fancy degree, had been looking for an excuse to make an example of a veteran employee, a white man, to signal the start of her new woke regime. This narrative, born of fear and prejudice, quickly hardened into his reality. He wasn't just fighting for his job. He was fighting for his honor against what he perceived as a gross injustice. On the third day, he hired a lawyer, a shrewd, combative attorney named Rick Jennings, who specialized in wrongful termination suits. Jennings listened to Kyle's version of the story with a practiced, sympathetic ear. So she was calm, Jennings asked, probing for weaknesses. Too calm, Kyle insisted. It was weird, unnatural, like she was baiting me. Any normal person would have been yelling, making a scene. She was just watching, and she never once mentioned who she was. If she'd just said, "I'm the new CEO," none of this would have happened. It's entrapment, that's what it is. Jennings latched on to this. "We can build a case around that," he said, his eyes gleaming. We'll argue that you were placed in an impossible situation. You had a security flag. A real flag. Even if it was temporary, and a passenger who was being uncooperative and evasive about her identity. You made a judgment call to protect the flight. You were acting in good faith based on the information available. The story was a complete fabrication, but it was plausible enough to muddy the waters. The next step was to go on the offensive. A whisper campaign began to circulate among Global Voyager's ground staff. The narrative was carefully crafted. Kyle was a scapegoat, a loyal company man, being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. Emails and text messages flew between employees, fueled by a mixture of misinformation and resentment towards the new leadership. An anonymous online forum for airline employees lit up with posts defending Kyle. Heard the new CEO set up a 17-year vet at LAX. Came to the gate looking like a nobody, caused a scene. And now the guy's life is ruined. This is what happens when they hire for diversity instead of experience. She's probably going to fire all the senior staff and replace them with her friends. I've worked with Kyle for a decade. He's a stickler for the rules, that's all. This is a witch hunt. The campaign was surprisingly effective. It sowed seeds of doubt and created a faction of employees who were now staunchly pro-Kyle, viewing him as a martyr. Simultaneously, Jennings and Kyle began to build their counteroffensive against Lucy herself. They started digging, looking for any dirt, any past professional misstep or personal scandal they could use as leverage. They filed discovery motions, demanding Lucy's complete travel history, with the airline, her past employment records, and any internal communications related to her hiring. They were searching for a silver bullet, something to discredit her, and paint her as a vindictive, unstable leader. The investigation now being handled by the external firm, fair forensic analysis and impartial review, was methodical and thorough. They interviewed Chloe, the junior gate agent, who was terrified, but resolved to tell the truth. In a quiet, windowless room at an off-site hotel, she recounted the events precisely as they had happened. Kyle saw the doctor on her ticket, and he just changed. Chloe explained to the lead investigator, a calm, professional woman named Maria Flores. He was dismissive from the start. I told him the flag was a system sync issue, that it had already cleared on my screen. I have a time-stamped log to prove it. He ignored me. He said we need to be sure about people like her. When I asked what he meant, he just gave me a look. Did you feel Dr. Gabrielle was acting aggressively or suspiciously in any way? Flores asked. No, not at all, Chloe said, shaking her head emphatically. She was the opposite. She was calm, firm, but completely professional. Honestly, I don't know how she kept her composure. I was mortified. Kyle was... He was on a power trip. Chloe's testimony was damning, a direct contradiction to the narrative Kyle was building. But it was her word against a 17-year veteran. The investigators knew they needed more. The twist came from an unexpected quarter. The third-party firm's mandate from Lucy was not just to investigate Kyle, but the entire system that had enabled him. They began a deep dive into the LAX hub's complaint history, and what they found was staggering. The 12 official complaints against Kyle were just the tip of the iceberg. They discovered an informal complaint disposal system run by his manager and friend, Daniel Miller. Dozens of passenger complaints submitted via email or the airline's website that mentioned Kyle by name had never been logged into the official HR system. They were simply deleted or marked as resolved, with no action taken. The investigators found a trove of these deleted emails on a backup server, a digital graveyard of ignored grievances. They detailed instances of Kyle mocking a passenger's accent, refusing to assist an elderly man in a wheelchair because he was taking too long, and consistently targeting non-white passengers for random secondary screenings. This discovery changed everything. This was no longer about a single incident of poor judgment. It was about a conspiracy to hide a long-standing pattern of discriminatory and abusive behavior. Meanwhile, Kyle and his lawyer thought they had found their own bombshell. They unearthed a detail from Lucy's past, the tragic death of her husband, Ben Gabrielle, 5 years earlier. Ben, a decorated Air Force pilot turned commercial aviator for a rival airline, had died in a private plane crash. It was a non-work-related accident, a hobby he loved, but the circumstances were devastating for Lucy. Jennings saw an opening. It was a vile, despicable tactic, but he was a man who played to win. The new narrative they planned to introduce was that Dr. Lucy Gabrielle was emotionally unstable, still grieving, and held a deep-seated irrational animosity towards aviation professionals, especially veteran pilots and crew, who reminded her of her late husband. They would argue that her reaction at the gate was not that of a rational CEO, but of a volatile woman, projecting her personal trauma onto a dedicated employee who was simply doing his job. They were preparing to leak this story to a sympathetic journalist. It was a character assassination, pure and simple. They believed it would destroy her credibility and force the board to settle reinstating Kyle and issuing him a handsome apology. They had no idea that their grenade was about to blow up in their own faces, and that another, far more powerful truth was about to be revealed by an unlikely ally. Captain Samuel O'Connell was a pilot's pilot, with over 30,000 flight hours, and the silver hair to prove it. He was the respected, no-nonsense head of the Global Voyager Pilots Union. He had seen CEOs come and go, each with their own jargon-filled promises and 5-year plans that rarely survived contact with reality. When he heard the news about Lucy Gabrielle, he was skeptical. Another outsider, an engineer, and a numbers person coming to tell pilots how to fly planes. And when the rumors about the incident at LAX started swirling, his skepticism hardened. The pilots' union and the ground staff union were often at odds, but they shared a deep-seated distrust of corporate management. The story of a CEO entrapping a ground agent felt plausible to a man conditioned to expect the worst from the 50th floor. Lucy, anticipating this, knew she couldn't win over the company without winning over its pilots. She requested a meeting with Captain O'Connell, not in her office, but in the pilot's lounge at Chicago O'Hare, his turf. Samuel arrived to find her not with a coterie of assistants, but alone, sipping a cup of standard-issue coffee and studying a flight operations manual. She stood as he approached, extending a hand. Her grip was firm. "Captain O'Connell, thank you for meeting me. I'm Lucy Gabrielle." "Dr. Gabrielle." "Welcome aboard," he said, his tone professional but cool. "You wanted to see me?" "I did. I've been reading the latest fatigue mitigation proposals from the union. I think your points on augmenting crews for trans-Pacific red-eyes are not only valid from a safety perspective, but also financially sound in the long run, when you factor in the costs of burnout and attrition." Samuel was taken aback. Most CEOs started meetings with empty platitudes, not by quoting page 7 of his union's latest proposal. "I'm glad you've had a chance to look it over," he said, his posture relaxing slightly. "I'm not just looking it over, Captain. I want to implement it. But I also need your help. I understand there's a lot of chatter about what happened at LAX." Samuel met her gaze directly. There is. The men and women on the ground feel like one of their own is being railroaded. And you? Lucy asked. What do you think? I think there are two sides to every story, he said cautiously, and that a gate agent's job is to follow protocol. If a ticket is flagged, it's flagged. It wasn't, Lucy said simply. The flag was a system error that had already cleared. That's a verifiable fact from the terminal logs. Mr. Peterson was informed of this fact by his colleague, and he chose to ignore it. This wasn't about protocol. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low and earnest. Samuel, I'm not asking for your blind loyalty. I'm asking for your sense of fairness. I know the story being spun is that I'm some kind of vindictive corporate axewoman. But the truth is, I came to this airline because I love aviation. It's in my blood. I spent my life studying the physics of flight, the beauty of these incredible machines you command. She hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. My late husband was a pilot. Ben Gabrielle flew F-16s in the Air Force before flying 707s for American. Samuel O'Connell's entire demeanor shifted. The professional coolness evaporated, replaced by a look of shock and recognition. Ben Gabrielle. Good Lord. I knew Ben. We did our carrier qualification training together at Pensacola. He was one of the best, a natural stick and rudder man. I was so sorry to hear what happened. The sterile pilot's lounge was suddenly filled with a profound, shared humanity. He loved to fly more than anything. Lucy said, a flicker of deep sadness in her eyes, quickly replaced by resolve. He believed that the uniform, whether it was a flight suit or a gate agent's blazer, represented a commitment to excellence and to the safety and dignity of every single person you serve. What I saw at that gate, it would have broken his heart. It was a disgrace to the uniform. This was the truth Kyle Peterson's lawyer was trying to twist into a weapon. But hearing it from Lucy in this context, it had the opposite effect. It wasn't a source of instability. It was the source of her conviction. The story being prepared by Mr. Peterson's lawyer, Lucy continued, is that I am a grieving widow with a vendetta against airline employees. They plan to use Ben's memory to discredit me. A flash of pure anger crossed Samuel's face. To a man like him, who lived by a code of conduct and respect, this was beyond the pale. Disgracing the memory of a fellow pilot, a good man for a legal strategy, was a profound violation. That is a new low, he said, his voice a low growl, even for a lawyer. I'm telling you this, Samuel, because I need you to know who I am. I'm not here to tear this company down. I'm here to rebuild it into something Ben would have been proud to work for. A company where a 17-year veteran is judged on the quality of his character and his service, not just his seniority. And where a passenger, any passenger, is treated with respect regardless of what they look like. At that moment, a different drama was unfolding in the HR office back at headquarters. Chloe, the young gate agent, was giving a final, signed statement. After her interview, her conscience had been eating at her. She knew about Kyle's habit of making notes, of covering his tracks. On a hunch, she remembered something. There's one other thing, she told Maria Flores, the investigator. Kyle had this little black notebook. He wrote everything down in it. Timestamps, passenger names, little notes. He always said it was to protect himself. I saw him scribbling in it right after Dr. Gabrielle walked away from the gate. This was the break Flores needed. Armed with Chloe's testimony and the evidence of the deleted complaints, the investigative firm got a subpoena for Kyle Peterson's personal effects, including the contents of his locker at LAX. There, tucked inside an old flight bag, was the small black notebook. And on a page dated for the day of the incident, they found the smoking gun. Scribbled in Kyle's own handwriting next to the flight number and date was a single damning line: Gabrielle E. Doctor, first class. Another one who thinks she owns the place. Taught her some protocol. It was malice, premeditated and documented. It eviscerated his claim of acting in good faith. It was the nail in his coffin, and he had hammered it in himself. The empire was about to fall. The discovery of Kyle Peterson's black notebook was the fatal blow to his defense. The handwritten line, "taught her some protocol," was not an ambiguous observation. It was a confession of malicious intent. It vaporized his lawyer's strategy and exposed his claims of acting in good faith as a self-serving lie. The plan to use Lucy's late husband's memory as a weapon was immediately abandoned, now appearing as the despicable, characterless tactic it truly was. Kyle's lawyer, recognizing the case was unwinnable, strongly advised him to seek a quiet resignation. A settlement, he argued, would allow Kyle to leave with some dignity and avoid a formal termination on his record. When the offer was presented to Lucy Gabrielle, her response was delivered without hesitation. No, she stated to her legal team. There will be no settlement and no quiet exit. Mr. Peterson's actions were public, and the consequences will be transparent. The process will run its full course. This refusal signaled that her goal was not simply to remove a problem employee, but to dismantle the system that had protected him. The third-party investigation, now armed with irrefutable evidence against Kyle, widened its scope to his manager, Daniel Miller. The focus was on the trove of deleted passenger complaints that Fair's forensic team had recovered. Confronted with undeniable proof of a years-long cover-up, Miller's composure cracked. He offered a series of weak excuses, from a faulty IT system to an overwhelming workload. But the evidence was too specific. Digital records showed him personally marking dozens of serious complaints as resolved mere minutes after they were received. In a final desperate act of self-preservation, he turned on his friend. He admitted to the investigators that he knew of Kyle's attitude towards certain passengers, but had chosen to handle it informally to avoid official reprimands. In trying to save himself, he confessed to the very negligence and cronyism the investigation sought to eliminate. The findings were compiled into a damning report that landed on the board's desk. It painted a clear picture of a toxic microculture at the LAX hub, where misconduct was ignored and a manager's personal friendship was valued more than the company's integrity. The final hearing was a formality, but a necessary one. It was a methodical presentation of justice. Kyle Peterson sat before a panel of senior executives and the impartial investigators. He was no longer the smug, authoritative agent from Gate 42B. He was a defeated man in a cheap suit, forced to confront the consequences of his prejudice. When presented with a laminated copy of his notebook entry, he had no defense. "I made a mistake." He mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. It was a stressful day. Was it a mistake to ignore your colleague, or was it a mistake to document your intent to punish a passenger? The lead HR executive asked, her voice cold and even. Kyle had no answer. He was terminated for gross misconduct, discriminatory behavior, and dishonesty. His 17 years of service were rendered meaningless, erased by the weight of his actions. An hour later, Daniel Miller faced the same panel. He was terminated for gross negligence, failure of managerial duty, and active concealment of employee misconduct. The karma was precise. The man who had protected his friend from accountability was now facing it himself. His career ending because of the very cronyism he had fostered. The unraveling did not stop there. The local HR representative, who had consistently overlooked the pattern of complaints, was demoted and transferred. Lucy approved the hiring of a new, highly respected head of West Coast operations with a clear mandate to reform the LAX hub from the ground up. The sickness that started with one man's prejudice was being systematically purged from the company, a necessary and painful procedure to ensure it could never happen again. The terminations of Kyle Peterson and Daniel Miller sent a clear, powerful message throughout global Voyager Airlines. The old ways were over. But Lucy Gabrielle knew that fear was a poor foundation for change. To truly rebuild, she needed to inspire trust. She chose to do so not from a corporate boardroom, but from the floor of a cavernous hangar at JFK, with a gleaming 787 Dreamliner serving as her backdrop. In a live-streamed town hall address to the company's 80,000 employees, she stood before them and did the unthinkable. She told them the passenger from the now infamous LAX incident was her. She didn't recount the story with anger, but with a surprising sense of purpose. "That day I was given a gift," Lucy stated, her voice steady and clear. "I was given the gift of seeing our company through a passenger's worst experience. I saw how protocol could be twisted into a weapon of prejudice and how a culture of indifference could allow it to happen. I saw the sickness in our system, and I promised myself that the healing would start immediately." She then laid out her vision. The Voyager Promise, a complete overhaul of the company's culture. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a concrete action plan. She announced a massive investment in new comprehensive training focused on dignity and de-escalation. She introduced a new anonymous reporting system, managed by a third party, empowering employees to report misconduct without fear of reprisal. Finally, she created a culture task force to be co-chaired by the respected head of the pilots' union, Captain Samuel O'Connell, ensuring that employees would be the architects of their own work environment. "This is not about punishment. This is about purpose," she concluded, her gaze sweeping across the hangar. "Our purpose is to connect people. We can't do that if we build walls between ourselves and our customers. Every person who trusts us with their journey deserves our respect. We will earn that trust anew on every flight at every gate. Let's get to work." The applause that followed was more than polite. It was a roar of relief and renewed hope from a workforce craving genuine leadership. Over the next 6 months, the changes took root. The new dignity in the details training became standard practice. Customer satisfaction scores for the first time in 3 years began a steady upward climb. The culture was slowly but surely beginning to shift from one of cynicism to one of shared pride. Lucy was on a flight from Chicago to San Francisco, working quietly in an economy seat when a flight attendant approached. "Excuse me for asking, ma'am," the young man said with a respectful smile, "but are you Dr. Gabrielle?" Lucy looked up from her laptop and returned his smile. "I am." A look of genuine appreciation washed over the flight attendant's face. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice low but earnest. "My partner is a gate agent in Denver. He says things are different now. Better. We feel like management finally has our backs and that we can be proud of our uniforms again. So thank you." Lucy felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling more satisfying than any quarterly earnings report. This was the true metric of success. This was the change she had fought for. As the plane continued its journey westward, She looked out the window at the world below. The irony was not lost on her. The man who had tried to bar a single gate to put one person in her place had, in his arrogance, thrown open the floodgates of a revolution. He had intended to be a gatekeeper, a final barrier. Instead, he had become the unintentional catalyst for a new beginning. For Dr. Lucy Gabrielle and the reborn global Voyager Airlines, the sky was no longer the limit. It was the promise of a better destination. That single ugly moment at the gate wasn't just the end of one man's career. It was the birth of a new era for an entire airline. It's a powerful reminder that the culture of any organization is defined not by the mission statement hanging on the wall, but by the worst behavior it is willing to tolerate. Dr. Lucy Gabrielle could have sought simple revenge, but she chose reformation. Kyle Peterson's karma wasn't just losing his job, it was becoming the unintentional catalyst for the very change he resisted his legacy a footnote in the story of the woman he tried and failed to ground. If this story of justice, accountability, and the incredible power of quiet strength resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that integrity can win. And most importantly, if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications for more true life stories of karma consequence and incredible moments of reckoning. Thank you for watching.